STEM City USA Healthy Doses series is your passport to a balanced lifestyle. Hosted by Dr. Tiffany Anderson and presented in the Boston Scientific Auditorium. And now, Dr. Tiffany Anderson.
Good morning, everybody, and happy Saturday. My name is Rayondon Kennedy, and this is Healthy Doses. Healthy Doses was created to give you the tips, tools, and resources that you need to be the best version of yourself that you can be. Healthy Doses is brought to you by Boston Scientific, and our host is Dr. Tiffany Anderson. Good morning, Doc.
Hey, good morning, Ray. How you feeling?
I'm feeling very, very good. I know we have a really cool topic to talk about. It's actually one of my favorite, and it's kind of fitting seeing as Halloween was just earlier this week.
That part. That it flew but fast, and I don't know the world recognized that Halloween existed this year.
I think we jumped straight into Christmas.
Right.
But staying on topic, Dr. Anderson, what do we talk about today?
Yes. So today we are talking about conquering fear. We're gonna really kind of break down the way that fear shows up in our lives, in our bodies, physically, emotionally, spiritually, right? And just addressing some tools that can possibly help us, the audience, get an idea of how they can begin to conquer fears, right? And just being here this morning is conquering the fear, right? Because recognizing that knowledge is power. And whatever we take away, whatever we learn from our day-to-day lives, right, that helps us to continue to navigate our lives in the best way possible. So first, I wanted to start this episode with just a personal story around fear and what it kind of has looked like for me, specifically surrounding jumping, right? Taking a leap. And so for me, I know fear very well, deal with fear all the time, every day, in and out, fear, anxiety. I don't know if anyone has fear of the unknown. That has always been a theme in my life, in getting more comfortable with the unknown, because as we know, life is unpredictable. And as humans, we want to have a sense of control. We want to be in the know, right? And we study and all those things. And life doesn't care. It doesn't matter how much you know. You can't predict the outcome, right? And so, for example, a few years ago, I launched a wellness apparel line through my business, Crown Therapy LLC. And I was so afraid of how it would be received, right? Because it's outside of kind of the realm of what I do with, talk therapy and, working with individuals, families, and couples. And so it's like, what does that mean to then branch out and have an apparel line, and why, right? And so I had to recognize that it's okay to live in all your talents, to live within your gifts. You don't have to restrict them. You don't have to stay within the status quo that says this person should look and do things that look like this. And so I had to recognize that I really wanted to try this. And so the fear of jumping, the fear of putting myself out there and failing, right? The fear of being judged, was all those things. And so one of the biggest things that I had to do was recognize that the fear wasn't going to go away. I wasn't going to just wake up one morning and be like, it doesn't exist. But that I had to do it anyway, because it was something that I was extremely passionate about. A few questions that I asked myself that I'll never forget was, number one, are you willing to do the work? My answer was yes. Okay, if you're willing to do the work, whatever comes with it, you'll figure it out. Another question was, do you trust that you will always bounce back? Do you trust that you can always land on your feet and figure things out if they don't go the way that you plan them to? My answer was yes. Okay. Um, the last one was, are you willing to sacrifice for this leap? If that's sleep, if that's loss of funds, if that's conflict, are you willing to sacrifice, right, to take this leap in your life and to challenge yourself in this moment? My answer was yes. And so I did it. And it was, you know, successful, right? But that's relative. And that's not, for me, it wasn't even that important at that point. It was all about taking the leap and doing it afraid. So I just wanted to share that story. We will pick up after this commercial break from our sponsors, Boston Scientific.
Welcome back. So I'm excited. I'm excited to get into this topic on fear and how to overcome and how to conquer and how to master your fear. Um, Before we jump into it, Dr. Anderson, I want to remind everybody that this is an interactive show. You can talk to us if you're watching us right now. Hello, how you doing? We would love to hear from you. If you have any questions, there's a QR code right above Dr. Anderson's head. I'm gonna flash it right there. If you are on your computer and you can use your phone, take your phone, open the camera, scan it, and you can just drop us questions right there. If not, I've dropped a link into the chat, into the comments. And so if you see that, go ahead, click that link. It gives you the same access where you can communicate. We would love to hear your stories. We would love to hear your testimonies if you have them. And any questions that you have, we can address them right here live on the show. And if you're watching on social media, just drop it in the comments. If you're on YouTube, just drop it in the comments and we get it. And we might even be able to give you a little shout out. So we'd love to hear from you. We'd love to communicate with you. And lastly, if you're in STEM City, USA, and inside the La Familia Health and Wellness Auditorium, there's a chat button. It says chat right on the side. And if you're watching live in the metaverse, you can communicate with each other. You can communicate with us because we got an eye on that. And so, Dr. Anderson, um, one thing that I've found is about myself is I tend to run towards fear. And so I'm interested to figure out, am I crazy? Am I silly? Am I doing the wrong thing? Or is there some rhyme reason to it? And I would love to get into some of the stories and kind of figure out why that is. And so let's start off, Dr. Anderson, but let me ask you this. What is fear?
Mhm. So how we understand fear is it's a natural, powerful, and primitive human emotion, right? So the understanding is that everyone, for the most part, right, has a human emotion of fear, um, and that it's there for a reason. Understand it's there for a reason, right? So, in regards to the research in psychology, we understand it as like a universal biochemical response to um, like alerts, right? So, certain fear alerts that makes us more present to dangers or of threats of harm, whether that is physical or psychological, right? Um, and sometimes fear can stem from real threats, but it can also originate from imagined danger, right? So think about the time when you're just thinking about what it would feel like or be like if I fell down the stairs, if can't heaven forbid, if a dog came and was chasing me, imagine, right? Imagined fears, or the loss of someone, right? So it can also come from that. It can be real, it can be imagined. Um, while fear is a natural response to some situation, it can also lead to distress and disruption when it is extreme or out of proportion for the actual threat. Makes sense? Yeah. So for a lot of folks, um, their imagination may cause them to have extreme fear. And we would say, okay, that's a bit out of proportion, right? Um, because it's not real in the moment. And so fear is a real and extreme emotion, and it can interrupt a lot of things if we're not careful with the way it responds in our body.
Yeah, so that's interesting because a lot of times I feel like people, it's the thought of fear or the perception and making
Mhm,
things up. And we talked a little bit about this in our anxiety episode
mhm,
because fear definitely leads to anxiety.
mhm.
But fear can hold you up a lot because that perception can stop you from doing a lot of things that might not even really be there. You talked about being chased by a dog. I don't know why this is the scenario that popped into my head, but that might be a shortcut, right? And you might think, you hear a dog on the other side of the fence, right? But you think if you go down there, the dog's going to chase you. This is your shortcut home. Could be 5 minutes home versus 15 minutes going all the way around. But
Mhm.
people's perception of not of the threat of it, without actually experiencing it, will stop them from going and go all the way around.
Mhm.
And when we do that, in life, all the time, you imagine things and it stops you from going through when that could be the path, the shortcut that you needed, or whatever it is. And so fear has a big impact on your life. And so can we talk about a little bit, how does fear impact our everyday lives?
Yeah. And I was going to say a point to what you were saying, that fear can prevent us from going down a certain path. Um, and use that example of a dog, being behind a fence. Again, with fear being a primitive emotion, right? We're taught, like our bodies are taught to respond to any kind of threat, right? So that dog being on the other side of the fence also tells us you're taking a risk, right? And it's there for a reason. So if you decide to go down that path with that dog, right, it's still a risk. It can still be a potential harmful risk, or it can be the best path to get to where you're going. Does that make sense? And that is fear. And that is fear. And that is doing it afraid anyway, right? But
Hmm.
it's a risk every time. And I just wanted to say that because that's what it feels like. Um, and I just wanted to normalize that for folks that are like, well, there's a dog. Well, why would I? Right. And then there's someone who's like, okay, but I think the risk is worth it. Yeah. And then some may argue and say, well, going around is a part of my process. And I'm okay with doing that and minimizing the risk. No one's wrong here. No one's wrong. So I like that analogy, but I also recognize that different personalities can, process that information very differently because it's still a dog.
Hmm.
But I think it is important to recognize, like, is the fence 20 feet high? What's the likelihood of the dog getting through the fence? Right, Ray? That's what we're really
Yes.
talking about. Yeah. What's the likelihood of it?
Evaluating the situation and taking the proper precautions.
Yes, yes,
Yes.
sir. Yes, sir. Because just hearing it, it could be that dog is like close to breaking down that fence. But when you assess,
Hmm.
you recognize there's no way. It's very unlikely that that dog can get through. And so you're afraid, but you're walking that path anyway. So I love that analogy, and I just wanted to give
Yeah.
you context about that. Okay. And so your question, how does it impact
Hmm.
like our everyday lives? And so, um, with fear, with certain emotions that aren't regulated or prolonged, they have, they can have negative effects. And I just want to be honest about that. But I also want to say that fear is normal and it's a normal emotion. Um, this is just kind of what happens either long term or just in the moment, right? When our nervous systems are all kind of out of whack and shaken up. And so um, there's obviously physical, emotional, environmental, and spiritual risk um, that fear can can affect. But this is more so for like chronic fear, right? And like overall health. And so um, it can definitely affect your immune system and how it regulates itself, right? So it can cause some dysfunction. It can impact your endocrine system, your autonomic nervous system, as we know, our sleep wake cycles. Yeah, some have difficulties going to sleep. Or difficulties um, falling, right? Falling asleep. And that's a whole another thing. But that sometimes with fear, if you can't kind of slow down your heartbeat, right? Get comfortable enough to fall asleep, it can cause some people to like jolt awake, right? Even the fear of falling. I don't know if you've ever felt that when you're sleeping, that falling effect, going down to sleep. Some folks have difficulties doing that, allowing their body to literally fall into sleep. Eating disorders, um, the way it can affect us physically, um, it can cause like headaches that can turn into migraines, um, muscle aches that can turn into fibromyalgia, body aches that can turn into chronic pain. And so it can impact like your breathing that can potentially turn into asthma. So it's like where it starts, and when it's chronic, it can turn into kind of the worst case scenario. In regards to emotionally, this is a big one that probably many of us can attest to. There may be a dissociation from self, right? Emotionally, where you kind of detached emotionally because you're so focused on the fear. And so it can cause just kind of like an emotional disconnect, um, unable to have loving feelings. So, folks that are in constant fight or flight in their bodies at all times, again, that takes priority, right? The threat is always going to take priority over connection, vulnerability, love, joy, happiness, right? Because the body is just trying to survive. So if the body believes that there's a imminent threat, that's what it's going to focus on. And so a lot of times we are constantly regulating our nervous system. But if there is a history of like trauma and other things, then we have to do a lot of work to kind of stay away from fight or flight and kind of regulate our emotions. It can develop into learned helplessness where you just feel like you can't get out. There's nothing I can do. Um, Phobias, right? Phobic anxiety. There's many phobias around, certain fears of certain things. Mood swings, obsessive and compulsive thoughts. Um, and so that's more of the emotional. When we think of environmental, um, you think of just constantly living in fear and generating situations um, due to kind of uncertainty of like moving, right? So some folks, if they're constantly in fear, they'll kind of stay in the same place. They won't like move to different states or different areas because they're constantly in fear, the unknown and what that would look like. Um, Not able to find like safe housing, um, afraid to leave home because of certain phobias. So that's more environmental. And then spiritually, it can turn into a bitterness or fear towards the divine or others, right? Again, not being able to kind of feel that safety and that emotional connection to others and the divine because of that fear of just life and just not feeling safe. It could possibly interrupt one's connection, um, spiritually. Confusion with the divine or religion, a loss of trust in others or God, wanting God to fix it and feeling as if God's not listening can happen often, and I understand that. And just overall despair related to perceived loss of spirituality.
We live. One of these days, I'm gonna get that right because I'm doing a lot of paper shuffling over here. But that was a lot, Dr. Anderson. Like you just lot. Fear is as always. Oftentimes you hear fear, and there's a lot of negative energy around the word, and you just talked about a lot. Fear impacts us. Probably a lot more than what we think. I mean, you just talked about physically, the physical ramifications, chest pains, I guess anxiety attacks, if you will. You talked about the emotional, not being able to form bonds or have healthy relationships. That's a lot, as far as our everyday, that is serious. Our everyday life, mental, just being paralyzed, mentally or even sometimes physically by fear, paralysis by fear. Environmental, being able to change your environment that you're in. Fear of change. I had classmates in college who were so afraid of being home, like having that fear of not being around their family, that like they left school and went back home to where it was more comfortable. And that could have been an opportunity that they were supposed to be in. Or I think about the fear I had when I was, seeking different opportunities, and that fear could have stopped me, or maybe turn around, and I would have never had that experience. And I think there's a lot of people like that. If you think about different things in your life, when has fear won and stopped you, and now you're doing the woulda, coulda, shouldas, if you will. And so it's important that we address that and how to overcome, because you might be passing up shots that you could have taken. But like I said, fear has a lot of negativity around it. But fear is not always bad, right? We have this. It's a basic emotion. We have it for a reason, because sometimes you're supposed to be scared. If I see going back to our dog scenario, that dog is standing right there, growling, snarling, drooling at the mouth. I'm supposed to go the other way. I'm not about to go through that. Like we have this emotional fear. Can we talk about a little bit some of the positive things? Why is fear good for us? And so now we can be able to balance, what is good fear versus bad fear. What are we supposed to acknowledge, and what are we supposed to, ignore and kind of push through?
Yeah. You know, yeah, long time chronic fear, as we explained, um, does have long term effects. But I also wanted to just point this out too. Fear that just comes with an emotion. Uh, when I say an emotion, like a situation, uh, someone calling you for an opportunity, and you're just like, "Am I cracked up for this? Am I worthy enough for this? Is this something I want to do?" Those have symptoms, right? Of it could be like upset stomach. I know I used to get those all the time. It could be like sweating. I know I get that when I'm like public speaking, right? Shortness of breath. It could be rapid heartbeat. It can be nausea or dry mouth. And I say that to say, just to kind of, again, normalize fear in a way that says, every situation doesn't have to be chronic, doesn't have to be long term. It can just be in the moment. Um, it could be while you're driving, you almost hit someone. Fear, right? Where you may get chills, or you may start to sweat or hyperventilate in the moment, but you're able to regulate your nervous system and move forward. So I just want to normalize that in regards to fear, that it does not have to be chronic or long term, but I try to give both sides. All right. In regards to Positivity, right? How is fear good for us? Ray gave great examples about that scary dog that says, um, go the other way, run, right? Jump. We don't want you to freeze in that situation. Maybe depending on the dog, right? But it's a way for our bodies to say this is an imminent threat, and you're either going to fight, uh, run, or freeze. But naturally, your body is just telling you what it needs to do because this is harmful. That's a good thing, right? That works for us in our benefit. Fear is healthy because it cautions us, to stay away from certain things, from certain people. Think about a time where you were in the presence of someone and you just didn't feel right. Um, Something in you just said, this is not a good person, or this is not a good situation. Think about a time you were at a party or you were at an event where something just said, it's time for you to go. I shouldn't be in this environment. This isn't safe, right? That's fear, that's intuition, and it's all interconnected, right? That is a good thing. That is a positive thing. Um, Fear also has an opposite, right? It's this idea. I don't know if you're familiar with this, Ray, but it was saying, I was reading something about positive fear and how it can be exhilarating, right? And how a lot of successful leaders search out like risky ventures that push them out of their comfort zones, right? And so they counteract the discomfort of fear by focusing on the positive side of learning and the growth that every fearful event generates, right? And so the idea is that you can't get this exhilaration without fear, right? Because it's the extreme opposites, exhilaration and fear, right? And so, oh, I can hear you. And so, I was gonna say, and so it's that opposite, right? Where it says, um, fear is the very thing that um, once you conquer it, it's the greatest feeling, right? Once you go against the very thing that you thought could never happen or that you were fearful of happening, you recognize that it's such a rewarding experience, and that once you practice it, you can keep trying it over and over and over again. So a lot of folks, and Ray included, go after fear, or it just doesn't allow fear to stop them from certain things because they recognize that on the opposite end, it may be a lot of positive growth and very rewarding experience.
So you're saying I'm not crazy, is
No,
what you're saying.
no,
but
easy.
but yeah, like what you were saying is kind of what I touched on at the beginning of the show. Is I think I live there because I kind of seek fear out, or I guess a better way to say it is I seek uncomfortable situations.
Mm,
Um, I'm very comfortable being uncomfortable, and I think there's a lot of things in my sports background, a lot of things in my actual life that have kind of led me to see that you know fear is kind of, or at least um, fear of situations, or being uncomfortable. There's usually a golden road on the other side, and I will talk about that a little bit later because I think I want to talk about the types of fear. Because like we said, there's real fear, there's danger, and then there's things that might just be uncomfortable, or it might just be perceived, and things that you're making up in your head. And so, can we talk about the different types of fear, and then maybe I'll share some stories about the light on the other side of fear.
yeah. So I'll talk to the three types of fears, right? So we have rational fear, right? So that is, remember we talked about that imminent threat. This is real. This is happening. That dog is right in front of you, right? That is rational fear. The threat is real, and you need to get to safety. We have primal fear, what is defined as like innate fear that is programmed into our brains, right? Um, for example, Many of us don't have pet spiders or snakes, right? That we may just naturally have a fear of those things, although we've never been bitten by either animal. We're just fearful of it, right? That is because evolution. That is because throughout the generations, our ancestors um, knew, right, that those animals in particular, these are just examples, were dangerous, right? So through their DNA, right, and their experiences, it altered their DNA that then, as the generations grew, we were just innately aware that certain animals, certain experiences were not safe. That's primal, right? That's genetics. That is through evolution. Um, yeah. And then lastly, we have irrational fear. Um, these fears are the ones that don't make logical sense and vary greatly from person to person. And so everyone, not everyone, but a lot of folks may have um, an irrational fear of something. Where it's like, okay, that's not logical. Or that's very, 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 very unlikely. And so, you know, it depends on the person. If we wanted to share with those who are, I'm sure all of us would be like, wow, your fear is really irrational. And then someone else is sharing, and it's like, well, so is yours, right? So there's no judgment. Irrational is irrational. But some of us may have those, and that's okay. But we also have to be aware of how those irrational fears kind of interrupt our lives, right? And that kind of leans into some phobias, like folks that, refuse to like drive over bridges or avoid heights or water or certain things that not that all of those are irrational, right? But again, what their mind and their fear tells them about those events may be irrational. And so those are the three kinds of fears, and how we kind of understand them to be in the ways in which they kind of show up in our lives. And so next, we're going to jump into this commercial break, um, and then we're going to come back and talk about how to conquer these fears.
We know how to treat the colds and the coughs. We know how to treat the bumps and the bruises, the cuts and fractures. But how do we treat, I can't afford a day off work to see a doctor? How do we treat, I've never had a doctor who speaks my language? How do we treat, I don't know how to connect with some of my patients? How do we treat, you're not listening? We can't treat what we cannot see. So we have to look closer and see what we're missing. People, patients, misdiagnosed, misunderstood, overlooked. These are the people left out of a system charged with helping them. And it's up to us to find them in our communities, in our relationships, in our data. We're meeting them where they are, discovering who they are. We're taking an honest look to understand their healthcare needs and delivering effective ways to reach them. We don't have all the answers, but together we can find the way to address the gaps in our healthcare system, to provide something better, to find more chances to save more lives. It won't be easy, but we can help make it right, because no one should be missed.
Welcome back, everybody. Dr. Anderson and I have been talking about fear and how it impacts our lives. And I want to jump into, how do we conquer? And I want to share a couple of stories. But before we do that, I want to remind everybody this is an interactive show. If you are watching live with us right now, we can see and hear you if you communicate with us. And so there's a QR code right above Dr. Anderson's head. If you scan that, you can drop us a question anonymously if you don't want to be recognized. But if you're watching on social media or inside the STEM City metaverse, there are chat features. Drop a line, say hello. We would love to hear. We would love to hear examples of fear in your life, and maybe any questions we can address it. And so, feel free to reach out to us if you're watching this live. We love to address some of the things or concerns that you might have. And so, when we were talking about fear, fear is a big motivator in my life, as I'm sure it is for a lot of people. I mentioned earlier that I like to run towards fear, and that's because throughout my life, I've learned that the best things are on the other side of fear. Um, and I'm not sure where everybody stands on Will Smith, after his incident, but like I've learned a lot about fear by listening to some of the things that he's done or that he's talked about publicly. He did like a whole series one time just on doing things that he was afraid of, or at least things that he said he was afraid of. And one of the biggest things I learned about that I learned from him in that is he said a quote that sticks to me and kind of like it's the soundtrack of my life. But he said, "God puts the best things in life on the other side of fear." And some of the examples I gave earlier, you can come to a situation if you fear, you can make a choice. You can go the other way, you can run, you can go do something else, or you can go towards it. And there's many examples in my life where that's happened. By this time, you guys know, sports is a huge part of my life. It's been a part of my life since I was young. And I remember the first time I got dropped off at baseball. It was at the park. My mom dropped me off in the parking lot and basically pointed. And there's hundreds of kids out there playing baseball. I was like, "Yeah, that's your coach right there. Go." And I'm like, "You're not coming with me?" She's like, "No, he's right there." And so I was scared. I don't know these people. And I was like 5 years old, maybe 4 or 5 years old, something like that. And I had to go out there. I was very nervous, but baseball and other situations became a very big part of my life, but that was because I ran towards it. I did it and overcame that anxiety that was rising up and did it. And there's a lot of other situations, even like things about maybe this show, for example. I didn't know what we want. I know we wanted to do it. I didn't know how it was going to look. As a producer, how would you do it? And there's a lot of fear that comes up, and I could have been like, "Nah, I don't want to do it." But there's a way to kind of get through it. And Dr. Anderson, I know we're about to talk about tips on conquering fear, but this is kind of my mindset. I was writing it down because I've never really thought this deep about it until really start. But like I see the situation and I analyze it, right? We talked about, is this a real fear or is this perceived? And so you start thinking about, what am I actually afraid of? Is this real or am I make believing? It's the fear, of doing X, Y, Z things that may never actually happen, and I'm blowing it up in my head. Is that going to stop me? And so I analyze it. Is this real? And once I realize that, I'm these are perceived, I can go through it. I start to think about, how can we make this work? Like, what does winning look like? That's something I learned through sports. When you talk about your plays or whatever, what does winning look like? Play that over in your head. And if you feel comfortable that you can execute it, you go forward. And that's kind of how I break down situations and figure out, is this something I want to do? Is this something I can do? And then you move forward. And so I seek it out, because usually on the other side, there's greatness, there's purpose, there's a reason. And like, you're like, when you get there, you're like, I can't believe I almost didn't do this. And there might be times like that in your lives where everybody's watching. Think about some of the best moments that you had. There was probably fear at the front of that, but you did it, you went through. I think about my wedding, we're getting ready to walk down that aisle.
Right.
There's a lot of fear, but I wouldn't have changed. I would do it 100 times, because on the other side of that is joy, is life. And so, Dr. Anderson, I know we want to talk about it, but I did want to share it, because the best things in life are on the other side of fear, and you can't let it turn you away all the time.
Yeah.
So,
some tips. Yeah.
yeah,
When you were speaking, you brought up quite a bit. There's a lot of things that we've done fearful. And you think back, as you get older, you recognize some of the risks that you've taken that you probably wouldn't take in your 30s, that you took in your 20s. I know I've done quite a few. Um, but like you said, those experiences kind of no, not kind of, have prepped me for today, right? And um, sometimes, we want to have that child, that 5-year-old that ran out to that group of people, right, at
Mhm.
the baseball field and started talking to their coach. Like we miss that child um, that wasn't so cautious or so scared because they weren't fully conditioned by society, right, and by the fears of society, and that has levels to it depending on uh, what group, what ethnic group you come from, your background, your lived experiences, all those things, right? So that's a part of fear surrounding lived experiences. Um, and we can dive into that. That's a whole nother show, right? And so I say all that to say, um, think about those times where you just did it and you didn't think so much about it. And oftentimes that is surrounding childhood or, like I said, teenager, like 20s, right? Where you may not have been so fearful of the unknown, right? And you just jumped. Think about those things. Um, you know, for for me, just thinking about college and school and being, the first to leave home at 18 to move to Houston by myself, fear, um, but also like exhilaration. Obviously one of the best experiences of my life, attending the HBCU, um, seeing folks that look like me, leadership roles, all those things literally set me up today. But fear.
And Dr. Anderson, can you imagine your life today if you didn't take that step?
Oh, no way, I wouldn't be in front of you.
And
I
and
wouldn't
that's
be in front of
and
you.
that's the point. Like
And that's the
the
point.
best things in life are on the other side of fear.
Yeah, there's no way. There's no way. And I would argue, I think that undergrad experience probably has shaped me more than my master's or even
Hmm.
PhD. And it makes sense because those years, that 18 to 22, you're still impressionable, right? You're
Hmm.
still growing into who you are and who you know to be. And I'm definitely more aware and all those things now. But I learned so much about myself. And I said that when I went off to school, I thought everyone thought like me, had similar lives, all those things you recognize. Everyone's different.
Yeah.
Everyone's different. And we have to get outside of our biases and just our limited experiences because it just changes you. So, yes, fear being dropped off, not just me, but my parents, their fear, and not
Hmm.
allowing their fear to deter me. And I love them for it and appreciate them for it because I know they were terrified. I know they were terrified. My poor dad cried. Like it was a lot, but it was never, don't do this. It's like, we're just going to drop you off afraid and
Hmm.
hope for the best. And we're here and we're okay. So,
I, I I think that's another Will Smith inspiration. Is like uh, I can't remember what movie, but it's basically like I know you're scared, do it scared. Like if there's fear, like, you got to do it, but do it scared. And
yeah,
so that's just how you got to approach it.
good.
But let's talk about solutions. Let's talk about how you and I just gave great examples of how we overcome fear. But let's give some tips, some actual, when you're faced with fear, how do we conquer it? How do we become conquerors? How do we become courageous and brave? How do we overcome the perceived uh, um, elements of fear?
Yeah. And I think that was Pursuit of Happiness, but you can check.
Yeah, we'll check. We got to get Will Smith back in
Okay.
good graces.
Um, okay. Um, so I'm going to give a few tips. And this is more around like daily fear, right? Because we want to kind of nip it in the bud as it comes. Um, And so first we want to just kind of take time out. So when fear pops up for anything, and it can be the language is not as small because it doesn't feel small, but it can be like an email, right? Um, responding to an email from your boss, from your colleague, whatever that is. Um, it takes some time out, right? So we want to think clearly when we're flooded with anxiety. So first thing you want to do is take time out to physically calm down. When things like this happens, to me in particular, I get a text message, an email, or something, I may not respond. Oftentimes, if I'm anxious or fearful around it, or something arises in my body, I don't respond immediately because oftentimes what I'm reading or what I'm hearing is not what's being said, right? Because we're hearing it through a lens of fear or anxiety. So take a step back, give it whatever 5-10 minutes a day, whatever you can spare, and then read it again and see if the same emotions come up. Because oftentimes it will not. It will not. It's just how our body perceives that initial threat that feels like, oh, this is bad or this is overwhelming. And then you read it later or you see it later and you're like, whew, it's not nearly as scary as I thought it would be. So take time out, telling you that is a game changer. Calm your body before responding. You'll hear it and respond to it a lot differently, right? Next, you want to breathe through your panic. So if you have like certain breathing exercises, not that they have to even be elaborate, they can simply be 3 deep breaths. Understand the way that we breathe as humans. We're not supposed to be breathing like, you see how quickly we breathe? That's not how our body was really created. It's just our lifestyles that cause us to breathe a lot quicker than we need to be. We're supposed to be breathing deeply from our diaphragm, and that's when your stomach, my stomach doesn't really go in anymore, but that's when your stomach goes in, right? And it goes out. That's how we're supposed to be breathing. So I want you to practice that 3 times to breathe from your diaphragm in and out completely. Do that again and then do it again, right? So you want to breathe through the panic. Next, we want to face our fears. We know what that looks like, right? We talked about it. Fear makes things scarier, makes it feel a lot worse than it actually is. So if panic one day is getting into an elevator, right? If you just panic one day, it may be best when you're ready to get into another elevator, right? Because we want to go towards it and not away from it, okay? And that's okay if you have support, if you have a friend, if you need to breathe through it, but we want to go towards the fear, right? And not run from it, okay? Another thing is if your fear may be a bit irrational, you may want to just think of it. Think of the worst case scenario in regards to that fear. It's impossible to truly put yourself in that moment because you haven't experienced it yet, right? And so fear may be, like we said, kind of perceived. We may be trying to, the thing is like just the thought of it is fearful, but when you put yourself or try to put yourself in that particular situation, we recognize that it's not possible because we've never experienced it, right? And so just, if it's something irrational, try to put yourself in those shoes. If you can't, we recognize that it's simply something that we haven't experienced and it's less likely that we would. Okay. Look for evidence, right? So if something challenges your thought, so if you're scared of getting into like an elevator and suffocating, ask yourself, have you heard of something that actually happened to someone like that? Like, is that likely? Is it probable? Is it something that is truly happening often, um, what would you say to yourself if a friend said something similar, right? How would you support them? Would you say it's irrational? Would you say, I hear you, but that seems very unlikely, right? So you kind of, you want to put yourself in that situation as well, right? You want to ask yourself, is that rational? Is it likely? Um, Sometimes when we are fearful, we, um, you know, we try to kind of perfect certain things where we feel like, um, if I only do everything right, I can avoid fear. That is not true. That is not true, right? So we can't be perfect. Life is unpredictable. Like I said earlier, we're going to have bad days, we're going to have setbacks. And it's important to just remember that life is messy, and that we're trying our best every single day. And so don't get so caught up on like, if I do this, I can prevent this, I can, because you're going to always be disappointed because life will find its way to life. And that is okay. That is okay.
Life be life.
Life be life. Next, you when in moments of fear, you can visualize a positive place, a happy place, right? You can close your eyes, think of a place of safety and calm. This is all around visualization, even meditation, if you want to compare the two, right? So you can think of a beautiful picture, a beautiful place that you would like to be on the beach, feet in sand, right? Whatever kind of calms you down. Next, we want to talk about it. Exactly what Ray and I are doing. We want to talk about our fears. This is good. This is surrounding vulnerability. This is allowing someone else to process your thoughts with you, probably help you through it, and to give you feedback and to let you know that um, it may not be as fearful as you think, or they can have a shared experience and help you to get through it or help prepare you, right? No, for me as a mother to be, there's fears, right? And so talking about it, researching about it, watching YouTube videos, like whatever you can do to start to prepare is really important, right? So we can kind of minimize that fear. Alrighty. Um, we want to go back to the basics, right? So a lot of folks may turn to negative coping styles to get through fear, but this only makes it worse, right? So just focus on what you can do in the moment. Focus on walks, talking to folks. Get back to the basics. Don't kind of overextend yourself, and uh, don't lean into negative coping mechanisms like alcohol or like drugs or certain of it could be overeating, right? Certain things that aren't helpful. And then lastly, you want to reward yourself. So after you finally get back to that email, you can take yourself out, you can get a snack, you can kick your feet up, right? But you want to kind of create some sort of incentive for the work that you've done and kind of going towards your fear. So your mind and your body can get used to going towards instead of running away.
Dr. Anderson, I do have a couple of questions coming in, but before we jump over there, real quick, when is fear, when does fear become too much for a person where they can't apply those tips and they have to come see professional help? They have to come see Dr. Tiffany Anderson. At what point, or what does it look like when it's time to start to seek out professional help?
hmm Um, the thing with fear and the way that it shows up in each individual's life is different, and so it may be this individual may come in if they're constantly anxious or overwhelmed, feel as if they're drowning, interrupting their relationships. Remember, we talked about chronic fear causing interruption and like connecting um, with others, having loving relationships. They always feel like they're in like fight or flight, interrupting like their job opportunities or the work in which they're doing at their job, dissatisfaction with um, uh, work environments or relationships and things like that. is a telltale sign, and others obviously, panic attacks, heart palpitations all the time, like certain things these individuals may be aware of that says, okay, I need to speak to someone um, within the mental health field, right? And so a lot of that work would be just to help folks kind of transform their maladaptive behaviors into more positive thoughts and actions, right? So the therapist may be able to kind of teach them how fear has impacted their lives, and also for them to recognize the triggers of their fear, and then help them with building, tools and coping mechanisms for effective fear management. Um, and then there's also that exposure therapy and cognitive behavioral therapy. So exposure therapy is going to focus on changing their response to the particular object or situation they're fearful of. And that's more around phobias, right? That's when it kind of changes into something like that.
Dr. Anderson, this has been such a great conversation. I kind of wish we can extend it a little bit more. But before we go into closing thoughts, closing comments, there is a couple of questions that let's see if we can get through kind of quickly. And so one person asked us, they were talking about their parents and families, and they say many parents and family members can project their fear onto us. How can we avoid taking on their fear?
That's a good one. That's a good question. Um, the fact that they even know that it's a fear from their parents or family of origin is a good place to start, right? Because there's awareness that this is not my fear. And we talked about this too in another episode.
Family patterns.
Family patterns. Last
Yeah.
episode.
Go back, check out that episode if you haven't.
Check out that episode, because that will also go into depth around generational patterns and how they're easily passed down. For that in particular, I think it's important for you to recognize your particular fears, to recognize, is it yours? Where did it come from? Where's the origin of that fear? Because when we break it down, we'll find out, like, I'm not afraid of congested areas. My mom is. I'm not afraid of it. And so I can challenge myself to go in those areas, to drive in the city. That was my particular thing, remember? To drive in the city, to go towards it and not avoid it. Although, right, this particular fear has been like given to me and kind of ingrained in me, but it's not truly
inherited.
mine.
Inherited fear.
Yeah, it's not truly mine. But to be realistic, as a child, it's really difficult to say, like, don't take that on, or that's not realistic for me to say, because that's your community, that's who you learn from, and their intention is to protect, right? And so you take it on as they're trying to protect me. But as an adult, now your responsibility is to question everything. And it's to question what your truth is and what works for you. And so that's just internal work to just ask the question, is this mine or is this theirs?
Dr. Anderson, I got one more, and this is actually very interesting because I don't know the answer to this one, but is it possible to be fearless, like to live without fear?
I don't think so. I don't think so. Now, is there a disorder that is a very small population of the world have where they are fearless? Yes. That is not our truth, and that's not the average person. So yes, for folks that deal with that disorder. However, the average individual has the shared emotion of fear. So fearlessness doesn't necessarily exist. It just, like, fearlessness is not the absence of fear. It's just doing it afraid.
Just do it scared.
Do it scared. That's it.
Yep. Listen, Dr. Anderson, this has been such a great conversation. I'm going to give you the floor. But to everybody, I want to thank everybody for being with us. Thank you for taking time out of your Saturday to just listen to us talk about fear. And hopefully we were able to help you just kind of deal with the fear that's in your life. If there's anything you could take away that I can leave with you, it's the quote that, God puts the best things in life on the other side of fear. And if you need proof, just think about different things in your life. Think about the best moments in your life that you went and you did, and you're so happy that you did. Think about what was at the start of that before you did it. It was more than likely, it was probably fear, but you did it, you conquered it. And I think if you seek out that fear, if you seek it out, analyze it, process the situation, and go forward, do it scared, there's always joy, there's always light, there's always positive things on the other side of that. And it's almost like the devil tries to stop you from getting it. And so that's where that fear comes from. But just follow the tips, take time out, breathe through the panic, imagine the worst, and then figure out your game plan forward. Look at what's been done and how you can do it. Don't try to be perfect. Visualize your happy place. Find your strength. Hold on to that and go forward. Talk about it with loved ones. Talk about it with people you trust, and just do what you have to do. And then once you get there, celebrate, reward yourself, and do what you got to do. I hope this helped, Dr. Anderson. I hope I didn't steal too much of what your closing thoughts are going to be. But can you bring us home?
Always, yes. And so, Ray does a great pre-closing. But yeah, this is a great topic because we recognize that we're all dealing with this thing called fear. We're all just trying our best at all times. And we just recognize that life is a risk. Trying new things are a risk. I think a big part of fear that we didn't really talk about today is the fear of being judged and how people perceive us when we're trying new things, right? And I just want to encourage everyone today that what people think about you is none of your business, and that living out your gifts are very, very important. So despite your career choices, despite what you thought you would do or wanted to do, if there are other areas or avenues in your life that you want to explore, do them. No one says that because I'm a therapist, I can't be something else. I can't do other things, right? I can't explore other things. Sometimes we get too stuck in what we believe society wants for us, that we honestly don't live in our own truth and our own gifts. And so that was one of the biggest challenges that I faced in my fear around how I would be perceived. And so don't focus on that. Who cares? This life is worth living. And I just challenge you all to experience fear, but don't allow it to deter the overall goal, because it's simply an emotion and it's fleeting, right? So once it goes away and you don't do what you want to do, we recognize that we may have lost an opportunity. So truly fight through it, live through it, allow it to empower you, and do it anyway. Do it scared. Thank you all for joining. We have 2 episodes left. So we are unfortunately coming to an end. However, we look forward to having you come next week as we dive into a new topic. So please join us next week, Saturday at 11 a.m. Have a good one.
For more than 40 years, Boston Scientific has relied on our spirit of relentless innovation to advance science for life. We have the privilege and responsibility to deliver higher quality, less invasive, and more accessible device solutions, and the need has never been greater. Boston Scientific technologies are used to treat roughly 30 million patients around the world each year. Across our business, our products are supported by vast clinical data, including bench testing, randomized controlled trials, and ongoing real-world evidence to ensure the highest quality products make it into the hands of our customers. And we're always looking for ways to provide even more effective therapies and solutions. We invest over $1 billion annually in research and development to sustain a robust pipeline of meaningful innovations. We continuously strengthen our manufacturing and operations capabilities with artificial intelligence and advanced microelectronics to create devices that are smaller and smarter. And we're collaborating with our medical partners and physicians to advance digital capabilities with remote device support and a broad scope of training and education programs. Advancing science for life is also about supporting our employees and the communities in which we operate. Now more than ever, we rely on our values to guide our company as a global business and as a global corporate citizen. We're working to help confront healthcare inequities and social injustice, not only with financial contributions, but through volunteer service, advocacy, and expanding market accessibility. We're also focused on environmental initiatives that move us towards our goal of becoming carbon neutral by 2030. The unmet needs are great, but the future of healthcare is bright. Our innovation centers provide a place to explore opportunities, examine solutions, and see what lies ahead for medicine. Together, we can continue the relentless pursuit of innovation to help everyone live longer, healthier lives and make a difference all over the world.